So after months of a really tense trade war, the US and China have called a truce. But is it a real peace deal, or is it just a pause in the fighting? In this explainer, we're going to dig in and separate the high-profile handshakes from the hard reality of what was actually agreed upon.
All right, so the public story here really kicked off with a very warm, personal tone. President Trump really made a point of framing the meeting in friendly terms, emphasizing a personal relationship with his counterpart. It was all about setting a positive stage for the announcements to come.
And President Xi, well, he matched that friendly tone pretty much immediately. He echoed that same sentiment of partnership, stressing that, hey, despite their differences, the two powers should cooperate as friends. This was all very carefully coordinated messaging, right? It was designed to set the stage for a big announcement.
Okay, so you get the picture. The meeting was presented to the whole world as this huge de-escalation. The message was crystal clear. This was a breakthrough, a really positive step away from conflict and back towards cooperation.
And this whole idea of cooperation, it was really driven home with some pretty powerful imagery. President Xi used this metaphor of a giant ship. I mean, that's a very carefully chosen phrase, right? It's meant to convey stability and suggest that both leaders were at the helm, navigating through these choppy waters together.
But that's the big question, isn't it? The public presentation was all about unity and progress. But, to really get what's going on, we have to peel back those layers and look at the actual substance of the agreement.
All right, let's do this. Let's deconstruct this so-called truce. We're going to break down the specific give and take that formed this agreement, looking at exactly what each side put on the negotiating table.
Okay, so at its core, the exchange was pretty straightforward. The U.S. agreed to reduce its tariff rates. In return, China made a few key concessions: a promise to crack down on the flow of fentanyl, a delay on restricting critical rare earth minerals, and those are the essential bits you need for basically everything from our smartphones to high-end military tech, and importantly, a pledge to start buying American farm products again.
So, of course, the White House came out and presented this as a huge win. The official line was that this was a significant achievement, an outstanding group of decisions that was great for the United States. But, as you can probably guess, that's only one side of the story.
Because the moment you turn to the independent analysis, you get a much more cautious take on what this deal actually means.
And here's the thing. Pay attention to the language the experts are using. They are not calling this a deal. They're not calling it a solution. They're calling it a temporary truce. It's basically like hitting the pause button on the conflict, not ending it.
So why is that? Well, here's the key reason. Analysts, like those at the Brookings Institution, they point out that this truce, it pretty much just puts both countries right back where they were before this latest round of tariffs even started. So it's more of a reset than a real resolution.
And that brings us to what might be the most important part of this whole thing, what was left off the table. Because crucially, the biggest, thorniest, most complex issues between these two economies, they're completely untouched.
So this truce, it completely dodged the really deep structural issues at the heart of the conflict, things like government subsidies, market access for American companies, and U.S. tech restrictions. And these aren't just details. They're called structural because they go to the very core of how each country runs its economy, and those approaches are fundamentally different. That's what makes them so hard to solve. None of that got resolved. It all just got kicked down the road for future talks.
And on top of that, the focus of this meeting was incredibly narrow. This 2-hour sit-down was almost entirely about locking in this trade pause. That meant other huge geopolitical flashpoints. I'm talking Taiwan, the future of TikTok. They weren't even on the agenda for this meeting.
So, what happens now? Well, this truce has basically bought both sides some time, but not a lot of it. The focus now shifts to a very tight deadline to try and negotiate a much more comprehensive and hopefully lasting agreement. So right now, we are in a critical 6-month window. Think of it like a runway, as some experts are calling it, for negotiators to finally tackle those big structural issues. The clock is absolutely ticking towards a potential summit in Beijing this April, where a more permanent deal could finally be made.
But it's not just about trade. There are other major pressure points to watch. With the big summit now on the calendar, experts believe China is going to use that as leverage. You can pretty much expect them to push the U.S. for concessions on other flashpoints, especially Taiwan, maybe by demanding a reduction in things like arms sales or diplomatic contact. That is a critical space to watch.
And that leaves us with the big question, the one that's going to define this whole relationship going forward. Was this handshake the real deal, the start of a genuine solution?
Or was it just a temporary pause before that giant ship sails right back into some very stormy waters? Well, the next 6 months will tell us a lot.